everybody. Today I am excited to welcome Lesley Koplow to the podcast. Lesley is the founding director emeritus of the Center for Emotionally Responsive Practice at Bank Street College and the creator of the Schools That Heal network. Ms. Koplow is the author of several books on children's mental health in schools, including Unsmiling Faces, How Preschool Can Heal, Creating Schools That Heal, Real Life Solutions, Bears Bear Everywhere, Supporting Children's Emotional Health in the Classroom and Politics Aside, Our Children and Their Teachers in School-Driven Times. Her most recent book for educators, Emotionally Responsive Practice, A Path for Schools That Heal, was published in 2021. She is currently writing, illustrating, and publishing books for children, including Stories for Children in the Time of COVID and Understanding Feelings in the Community. Ms. Koplow was the winner of the 2013 New York 0 to 3 Emily Fenichel Award for Educational Leadership and the Thomases Award for Leadership from Bank Street College in 2018 and the Most Distinguished Alumni Award from Bank Street College in 2023. Well, welcome, Lesley. I am so happy to have you as a guest on the Attachment Theory in Action podcast. Welcome. I'm certain that my listeners are going to enjoy this conversation as much as I am. I'm going to try not to fangirl too much while we have this conversation. Lesley, I would love to just invite you to share with our listeners some of your experiences and really, I start my podcast with the same question to all of my guests. If there was anything in your early life experiences that maybe led you down this path to working with educators, working in an emotionally responsive field and trying to build that with educators, if there was anything in your own experience that led you to this point.
Yeah, I think almost everyone I know in the field has had intense experiences as a child. One of mine was that I had an amazing third grade teacher who was transferred into the school where I was in Cleveland in like after the school year started, maybe like October of the school. And that school year, my parents got divorced and President Kennedy was shot in the same month.
Wow.
So I was a very traumatized person, and she was amazing. And having a lot of invitation in that classroom to be expressive, to write and draw, and the things that sort of came naturally to me, and having those woven into the school curriculum was amazing. And she was a graduate of Bank Street College, where I then went to graduate school for my first degree. Anyway.
Okay.
And so there's a lot of connections to past and present for me.
So you can go back to third grade, and that was when it really started. When then from there to when you ended up at Bank Street, when was that like realization moment for you of, okay, this is what I meant to be doing. This feels right.
I think I kind of knew this early. So in the sixth grade, the principal came along and asked whether anyone would be willing to help in the kindergarten every morning so that the kids could take off their winter clothes. And I raised my hand. I feel like that was my first job. Was in sixth grade. And then I was like a volunteer in a million places and in my early adolescence and later adolescence, and kind of felt sort of that calling, so to speak. And my first degree was early childhood special ed, and then subsequently went for clinical social work, which is a great combo. I love that combo.
Tell us a bit more about your experiences and everything that you have kind of done up to this point.
Okay, that's a long story. Okay. So my first job out of graduate school was in a Head Start program, which at the time was a block from my apartment.
Okay.
And almost everybody in the program at that point was Spanish speaking. I had never taken Spanish in school. I had French in, seventh grade or something. And I little by little became a Spanish speaker, más o menos, by being in this community and then taking classes along the way. But it was like living in New York City, but living in a tiny world within that. And that's what kept me in the city, really, because I liked the small world feel of it. And it was a Head Start program that had gotten a grant to be serving children with special needs. And Head Start does that anyway, right? Head Start is a poverty, it was born during the war on poverty in the 60s to help children who were living in poverty get what they needed in early childhood. And the program already had a certain number of special needs kids as sort of enrolled, but the programs that applied for a grant for having more services had more kids with special needs.
Okay.
So I was like the beginning of that program. And a colleague and I got to sort of observe in the classrooms for a few weeks. And we sort of thought what we were really seeing was more emotional and social than learning. And there was variations. I remember I had a kid who had limited vision and, things like that. But a lot of the kids were stressed and traumatized. And we had a psychiatrist in the neighborhood who volunteered his time to supervise. And we ended up evolving a play therapy program. And it was
wow.
It was amazing. And I was there for 7 years or 9 years, one or the other. And then it occurred to me that I probably couldn't do the work I was doing anywhere else because I didn't yet have my clinical credential. So then I went and got my clinical credential.
Okay. I love that those very first experiences are what has kind of driven you down the path that you've been on and the journey that you've been on. And I also love your description of that. That to me, it's got a couple of layers to it. Well, there's a couple of pieces to it. That description of it being a small world, that Head Start building center, whatever you want to call it, being a small world within that huge city, of New York. And the work that I've done with Head Start centers, I have almost always found that the feeling within those centers is one of family, is one of this is our family home. And to me, it sounds like that's almost what you're describing is this world, this is our home and our unit and a place where you come and you feel safe in this big wide world of the city.
Absolutely. And in the Head Start where I worked, and by the way, I am still a monthly mental health consultant for that program for like 44 years or something. Has always been like a way that families who were immigrants could connect and feel safe in a new place. As a stranger in a strange land, so to speak. And my grandma was an immigrant to this country. And I felt like when I went into the Head Start, and I didn't know Spanish, but I knew what that was like to go someplace where it was very overwhelming and not familiar. And you felt like you didn't know how to make a bridge to that place. So that I recognized from the beginning. And it was just a good fit.
Well, and it makes me think about in so many conversations that I have with really anyone working with children is
that so many people want to know the how to, the strategies of how to respond to a child's behaviors, and so many times we talk to them about it's more about how you're being with the child. And so, you walked into that center not being able to speak Spanish, and yet it sounds like you had an experience that you felt welcome. You felt a part of their small world. Okay, it took a little bit of time, I'm sure, as relationships do. But with that language barrier, they were still able to create this sense of safety, this feeling, because they were being with you in a certain way.
Yes. It felt familiar to me. And I was able to be with them, as you pointed out. And in the beginning, when I was just learning Spanish, I would still, as soon as I could speak enough to talk with parents with a little bit of Spanish, there was such huge relief on their part, because I was the one who was at a loss, not them, when demanding that somebody whose first language is other than English just stay in English all the time. So I felt like once that, even though I couldn't be fluent, I could be I could like communicate my value of the language and the culture.
As we're talking, I am just thinking about it's kind of a parallel process of what you're describing is kind of what we apply with our work with our young children, is that kind of our children are speaking a different language to us. And it's our job, it's our role as the adult to go and enter into their world, and try to learn their language better and understand their language better. It's amazing to me that how these conversations, we find these parallels in what you're talking about with the work that we do every day with our children and families. So if some of our listeners may know some of your work, some of them may not. I have your book, Creating Schools That Heal. This is not your most recent book that you've written, but it is one that's very close to my heart, because some of the work that I do is with early childhood educators, and we talk a lot about the social emotional milestones that you have listed in this book. And I said to you in my notes before we started recording that I'm a preacher of it, because I truly believe, you mentioned a little bit ago that many of the challenges that you were seeing in those children in that center were not kind of learning delays in that sense, but more of the social emotional challenges and those milestones that maybe weren't being reached or resolved. And I am a firm believer in those social emotional milestones, that they really are the underpinning and the foundation of everything that, comes later in life. Obviously, we are huge supporters of attachment and that particular milestone, but all of the rest build on and around attachment. So maybe you can share with some of our listeners where those social emotional milestones kind of became a framework. At what point did they become a real, okay, we really need to be focusing on these? And just tell us more about them. That would be great.
So when I was in Head Start, and then I went and got my clinical degree, and I needed to be in a different place because there had to be on-site social workers. So I was at a clinic near the city that had a homeless services program. So we were working with children and parents who lived in shelters. And that work, which was really all about trauma and the way that trauma can sort of fragment attachment was sort of all consuming and very interesting. And while I was there, I was offered a job to be the director of a therapeutic nursery in the city. And that was kind of a fantasy of mine, like, oh, I want to do that. So I thought, okay, I'm going to do that. And I did that. And again, we had really intense kids. We only had 12 kids, 2 classrooms of 6, but kids with very intense histories or kids on the spectrum, one or the other. And I was watching how it went, and I felt like we're one of the only programs that is looking underneath behavior.
Mm.
Behavior in itself is just a communication that all is not well.
Mm-hmm.
So we better figure out what's not well and how foundational milestones, if they're not met and they're not supported, you can't do all of the other things that society wants you to do, right? You can't, if you're not attached and you don't have someone to become attached to, and it's not supported or it's fragmented, then when you come into a space with other children, you can't interact with them well because you don't have any foundation to reach out from. So I sort of organized that program around, let's figure out what we're doing to support the early things that come first. So that when kids are 5, it was a preschool program, so that when kids are 5, they have better opportunities to connect in ways that are joyful for them and promote learning and will work in the world. But we're not going to do the crazy IEP thing. I'll tell you my IEP story. So we had to do IEPs for the kids because the center was both early childhood special ed and Office of Mental Health day treatment and daycare. So we had 10 million rules that we had to go by, and none of them were the same. So it's like, I'm sure you know.
Sounds familiar.
Yeah,
yes.
Familiar. So we had to do these IEPs, and we figured out you can take an IEP, and as long as you use a certain rhythm and language and formula, you could put any content in there that you wanted to. So instead of saying, this child will refrain from hitting peers 80% of the time, we'd say this child will allow an adult to respond when in distress 80% of the time. As long as we put 80% of the time or some number in there, we could put whatever we wanted in the body of it. And that's what we did. So we learned how to speak the language of, and I always tell teachers this, learn the language of your community and learn the language of development, and then translate one into the other. So
right.
They're not, because people get very stressed about standards and, oh, we have to do it this way because we don't need to. It's like, think first. How are we going to do that?
Yeah, I'm so glad you brought that up, because as you were talking, that was one of the questions floating around in my head. And often the challenge that we get, or sometimes the pushback from educators, is that, well, I have all of these standards to meet, or I have to write this goal in a certain way. And you're right. I mean, you do have to kind of stop yourself, and you have to really try and think outside of the box to then make it fit in the box, and write it in a way that still meets the needs of those standards or expectations, but is truly meeting the need of the child. Go ahead.
So I'm thinking I'm grabbing a teddy bear for.
Oh, sure. We love having extra guests on the podcast.
When educators get into a system where the pull is to make people happy on top. It's the child that gets neglected. It's a system of trying to get approval for practice that may or may not be helpful to this little person. But for me, there's no point in having a practice if it's not helpful to this little person. So we have to figure out, depending on where you are, and people work in such, different contexts, to figure out what context are you in? What's the language of that context? What are you seeing and hearing from children and parents? And how can you make sure you don't get lost? You're not, your attention is there with this little person and not here.
I do feel that many educators are struggling with that. And they want their attention to be with the little people or even the big people in high schools. They desperately want that. Also, they want to be able to do their job in the form of, I want to be able to teach you something. Like, this is why I came into this, to teach you. And whether that be teach you how to say your ABCs or teach you how to apply for a job when you leave here. They want to be able to do that. But then they find themselves stuck in that. It's this versus this. It's this system versus what I'm trying to do here. And, we have to provide empathy for that, because it is a hard thing to balance. And we know for most of our teachers and educators that their heart really is with the little person that they're supporting. And I think one of the things I've had to learn to do in my work with educators is try to help them understand that and you mentioned this earlier, but if we don't help particularly the young people reach those milestones and support them through those milestones, learning's not going to happen. Learning, we have to be in a relationship to learn from somebody. And so if those milestones are fragmented, if they're disrupted, learning's not going to happen. And so where does that leave us? Well, exactly. What can we do to get them to a place where they're ready for learning is helping them with those milestones and supporting those milestones.
Yes.
A question that I had that came to my mind was, oh my goodness, no, it's gone from my brain completely. So anyway, that's okay. So we have you kind of structured the milestones. What was the response from educators? What did they have when you kind of shared this information with them?
And I continue to do that. And it's always like, it like clarifies something. And it's, sometimes, I'm usually speaking with people who teach early childhood or elementary, right? But occasionally I'll be called in to talk with middle school people or principals of kids with all ages. And people always say, well, I don't think they're going to be that interested. I mean, you only go up till 9 years old. I said, they'll be interested. And I always get this, oh my God, that's exactly what's happening with 4-year-olds. Yeah, because development comes back around, and 2-year-olds and 14-year-olds have a lot in common. They're both trying to become themselves, and they want to push against authority. And it looks different the first time than it does the second time. So I always find a lot of receptivity, but that's kind of how emotionally responsive practice was born, because if you give the milestones, you get like and then everybody goes back to the classroom and life takes over, and it's like, do what they did before. So we developed a practice that supported the milestones so that it could be like I could write about it and I can talk about it in my project at Bank Street, which I'm semi-retired from, teaches it and works with schools and early childhood communities in the city and around the city, occasionally far away.
So before I do want us to talk about that, but I definitely want to make sure I highlight the point that you've just talked about, because it's one of my favorite things about the milestones is that they, and this is going to sound kind of silly because we do all go through them developmentally, they apply to all of us at whatever age we are at. Because you're right, they come back around. They may look a little bit different,
Yes.
but I'm just thinking from the top of my head, peer group. If you move to a new town or a new city or a new village, suddenly you're surrounded by a new set of people or you join a sports club, and here is a new peer group that you have to learn how to interact with. You have to learn the norms and the etiquette of the peer group, and you're a 40-year-old lady, and I think about psychological home base, and I always tell people this, and I'm sure she's going to be listening to this one, but I call my mom every day. She is my psychological home base. And, typically it's a parent or early childhood caregiver, but, we all have those home bases that we go to, that we rely on to help us refuel and, who speak to our soul. And so the milestones aren't just for children. They aren't just for early educators who work with those children. They apply to all of us. And sometimes I think as adults, we even find ourselves in the milestones acting the age that milestone is. So, it's not just that those concepts come up for us, but we're acting like that 4-year-old as well.
And that is like one of the truths about teaching, is that your childhood story comes into the classroom with you. And, you always say, and when I talk to teachers, if you work for IBM and you don't want to think about your childhood, don't think about it. But if you work with children, it's there. You were little, you had parents or have them, you had teachers, it's all there. And if you don't know your own story, it often comes out unconsciously in ways that you don't really want it to. The same with parenting. If you don't know your own story, you might repeat history that you don't want to repeat. And I think that caregivers and teachers have this amazingly intense job that no one understands unless they do it, because you're sorting out all kinds of internal stuff as well as figuring out the path to stay connected. And if you cut off your own story, the chance that you're going to be able to maintain healthy attachments with children is low.
I'm really glad that you brought that up too, that we spend a lot of work with whoever we're teaching or training or presenting to, talking about our own stuff. In our residential program, we all have to do an adult attachment interview because we know how much our own stuff can impact our ability to have and support the development of a secure attachment in a child. And, I love your comment that it wasn't, it's not just about your experiences with parents, but it's also your experiences with teachers. Maybe you had a wonderful relational experience with your parents, but you went to school and there was a teacher who really wasn't very pleasant, or maybe you had a teacher who was wonderful, and all of those things, positive and negative, will turn up in the work that you do. Maybe you'll have your teaching approach and it will be based on something that you yourself experienced. And what I find with many educators is we're really having to help support their understanding of many children are coming to us with a lot of different needs that maybe weren't there when we were children or were dealt with in a slightly different way. And that's a hard shift to make in your brain, especially if you are struggling to recognize your own story.
Yes. It's like teaching is not like anyone thinks it is.
No, anymore it isn't.
Right. So if you go, if you just had a Thanksgiving dinner and you haven't seen some relatives in a long time and you teach 4-year-olds and they say, so what are you doing? And you say, oh, I'm teaching pre-K, teaching where they say, oh, that's nice. You must have so much patience. And they have like a thought bubble of like around the rosy all day. And then you go home at 3:00. Like, there's no clue how present you have to be, how intense it is, how kids bring their whole lives into the classroom, what you bear witness to, what the pressures are from on top. It's not like people think it is. And if you're a teacher, you need a good mirror, meaning you need someone to see that so that you're good, to know you're in good company.
Well, so that leads us on. So tell us, and I hope that we can get to it in time, but I definitely want to hear a bit more about the mirror. And I also am so interested in hearing about this kind of your concept of inviting children to bring their whole selves to the classroom. And I think that this will come from what I'm about to ask you, but tell us more about your emotionally responsive practice and kind of what it looks like and what does it mean?
Okay. So
I know what it means, but our listeners don't know what it means, and I want to share the wealth.
So it means, how do you have a classroom that supports those early foundational milestones so that kids who come in with experiences that were not supporting those milestones don't leave the same way, so that the classroom can become a psychological home base? Because one of the things about school is, except for vacations, it's every day. Kids go away at the end of the day and they come back and you're still there, and they go away again and they come back and you're still there. So you count, you are internalized as an important person in the life of a young child. And that's why it's like such an opportunity that if you're in there in that core way, to be emotionally connected and responsive is essential. And then what we did in ERP is we developed classroom-friendly techniques that support that way of being. So you should definitely read. Everyone should go and buy Emotionally Responsive Practice, A Path for Schools That Heal, because it'll put this into, and a lot of my books are essentially about that, but this uses the language of it. So what we did is teach teachers and school social workers and principals about reflective technique, which is something that clinicians tend to know about. Educators don't tend to know about. Reflective technique essentially is providing a good mirror for people so that they're reflected accurately. So when you're at Thanksgiving and everybody's saying, oh, yes, you must be said something nice, you think, well, you have no clue. So you're not reflected accurately. And when you read the paper about, educators are neglecting blah, 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 you think, that's not true. It's not accurate. And it's frustrating. But if you're little and you're still developing, and you don't have a good mirror, it arrests development. You can't become yourself easily that way. So we give teachers this practice of making reflective comments to one another, not fixing things. And teachers are amazing fixers. Like they
Yes.
need to fix 27 things all at once in any given minute in the classroom. So that comes like this, but saying, wait, before you say, don't do whatever you're doing,
Mm-hmm.
Oh, why did you pour that paint on the floor? Say, wait, I see you're pouring paint on the floor. Now, what's happening? Which usually gets you this. You see me? You know me? You heard me? Huh, that's new. And then from that, once you get some kind of connection or dialogue, you can go toward the, here's what you can do with paint instead
Right,
of pouring it on the floor, right? But the sort of reflect before acting, reflect before emotion takes over, reflect so that the child knows that you're there and they are there. And that's a very benign example. But when kids are sort of lost it, when they're overcome by emotion, they don't know either one of those things usually.
Mm-hmm.
So
well,
sort of like reflect.
And I feel like what I heard you say too is that there's kind of two pieces to this. There's the inner and sometimes outer reflection of the teacher themselves. So in me as an individual, I have to reflect on my story, on my actions, what's happening for me in this situation. And then I have to support the child by reflecting back to the child too, what they're doing. Is that right? Am I hearing that correctly?
Well, the sort of self-reflection thing is a long journey, and it happens at different rates for different people because everybody has their own story. And we try in our work with schools and classrooms, we try to do a lot of different things at once, one being teacher support groups. So in the teacher support groups, we give people opportunities and to listen to other people's stories and to tell their own. In the teaching how to work in the classroom stuff, we give people opportunities to practice with each other because I'll say, okay, there's two people together. One of you tell a story of something that happened recently that was kind of annoying or difficult, and the other person just listen. The only thing you can do is make a reflective comment. So if the person says, when I got here, I couldn't find parking. I had to drive around for like a half hour. It was so frustrating. You can't say there's a garage at 108th Street. You can park. You have to just reflect the emotional part of it or the actual facts. Just say, oh, yeah, it's so hard to find parking. Just make one reflective comment. And if the person wants to tell some more of the story, that's fine. No solutions, just make another reflective comment and then switch places, switch roles. And it's so interesting how people react to that because for most teachers, it's so hard not to give a solution. But when people practice it between one session and the next with the kids, they're amazed that it's powerful because people never feel seen or heard. So if you're the mirror, all of a sudden, there's something different happening. And that is part of what ERP teaches people to do. And you can do that through language. You can do that by your choice of books, right? If you've got kids who are really anxious about separation, you pick the book, You Go Away, which has a million, scenarios of going away and coming back. If you have kids who are anxious about, I don't know, the doctors coming to check everybody's eyes or something, you pick a book about that so that you're reflecting where you're not competing for their attention. You figure out where they are and you reflect it through literacy, through language, through song, all kinds of ways that you can practice reflective technique through writing for older kids, writing prompts for older kids.
I love I love how you just phrase that you're not competing for their attention. And I've never really I've never really used those particular words to describe it, but now you have. It makes perfect sense to me that when a child is pouring paint on the floor and you say, "Oh no, don't do that," you're competing for their attention, because right then their attention is on the paint. And oh, what happens when I do? I have a 16-month-old, and we're still throwing things off the high chair at snack time, and so I'm living this on a daily basis. So it rings really true to me. And I don't do it every time, but I do try to say, "Oh, well, what happened? Now it's on the floor." Um, but I just really love how you phrased that. And now I hear it like that. It really does ring true that you're trying to divert the attention away from what it is that the child is learning about and experiencing, to sometimes to meet our own agenda, to meet our own thing, our own need in that situation. And I've seen how powerful it can be when, instead of doing that, instead of competing, and we reflect that learning that happens in that moment, or the relational connection that takes place. Like you said, somebody sees me. They're not like, "Oh, this is new. This is a new feeling. I can share this with somebody." So I just love that.
And the baby that throws the stuff off the high chair is so busy with playing with object permanence, which is foundational. So it's like babies know what to do when they have a partner. They have it down when there's an adult there to do it. It's just impossible to do those things by yourself. And so when they grow up, if they didn't have a partner and they grow up and come to school, then they are at a loss because they don't have those foundational moments.
Mm-hmm.
I was also thinking of kids who come into school with trauma and traumatic history, but no invitation to play about it, write about it, talk about it. The teacher has their agenda and they just go for that. And that's what nobody can do. You can't compete. I always tell people, if you think about the scariest thing that ever happened to you and listen to my talk will fade out and your experience will take over because it's yours. It will take up the front of your mind, and you won't be able to take in anything that's neutral or that's not your own. And that happens so much with children. They can't take in what we have to offer if they already have a mind full of traumatic confusion and affects.
Mm-hmm. Well, and would you agree that the same could also, and I'm not putting these in the same category, that's not what I'm going to say, but the same could also be said for just developmental needs and social emotional needs. That if those needs are great, then there's no room for the learning to happen. The brain is too busy doing other things. And again, not in the same category as a trauma experience, but the idea is the same.
The idea is the same, and the kids are going to be driven by what's missing. So it's just going to be like you're on two different planets. They're on, the planet of trying to fill in the gaps experientially, and you're on a planet of wanting them to be somewhere else. I want you to be up here.
Right.
And that's one of the things that is really complicated in the times we live in. It's that we know, like on that developmental agenda for 4 and 5-year-olds, they are cognitively aware that relative to adults, they don't have so much power. And they would like to rectify that situation. They become driven for power and competition. They have to be the fastest, the tallest, the strongest, right? And they they want to identify with figures that are even more powerful than their own parents. Superheroes, good. Royalty, also good. any figure that's more powerful than their parents, they like that. And if they go to school and the curriculum, if they're here and the curriculum is here, it's just right. They feel empowered because they need to feel empowered. They have like a developmental leaning toward powerlessness, which they compensate for by all that stuff that we just said. So if they're here and you're here, that's good. If you're here, which we call the zone of proximal development, oh yeah, I can get there. But if they're here and you're here, they can't get there and they feel inadequate in the classroom. They feel a sense of powerlessness in the classroom. And that is the last place you want them to feel powerless. You want early childhood to be, look what I did, look what I found, look what I made. You want it to be a joyful exploration of learning so that within the teacher-child relationship, there are things that grow and children feel like they planted those things and they feel pride in what they grew.
I'm thinking about how this can also apply to our older kids, and particularly those that are coming from places of trauma, and how they often don't have any power or control in what's going on around them, because they are still children at the end of the day, maybe bigger ones, but they're still children. And how the description that you just gave is so applicable in that situation also, that, we take away that power for children who really, really need it at that point in their life. Okay, developmentally, we might not think that they do, but because of all the life circumstances that are happening, we have to have that awareness, that attunement to what's going on in their world, combined with the fact that their front brain is most likely switched off. And so their pursuits of power and control are going to seem probably illogical to us, and chaotic. And so, how do we show up in the classroom and give them opportunities to feel a sense of power, to feel a sense of control? And, I just feel it's important to highlight, again, the milestones aren't just for children up to age 9, right? They are for all of us. And if we can open our minds to reflect on that and think about that, I just, as I said, I preach the milestones, so I see the power and value in them. So go ahead, Lesley.
I don't think I was going to say.
I know that we're running out of time. If you could describe the word inviting and how you use it, kind of in a bit of a nutshell, like what does that mean?
So in ERP, we talk about inviting and containing. And if we go into 10 classrooms in New York City, probably 9 of them, the energy is in containing children. The teacher's energy is in like managing, making sure everyone does this at the same time, doesn't do that. A lot of, okay, so if it's that kind of room, like sit in your seat and go like this, and you look in the window for a minute, it might look okay because everybody's doing this. But the minute that person steps out, or the kids go to lunch, or the kids go to recess, they act crazy because whatever they came in with is untouched, it's still there, and it will burst out. And if you don't invite what's there, it comes out anyway, through aggression, through outbursts, through tears, through, you have to have, okay, so I'll stay with my metaphor. So 9 teachers are over here. One teacher might be on the extreme end and is very inviting, has clay, has paint, has everything you want, but is new and doesn't really know how to contain children. They raise their hand to be a teacher because they like children. So having to say, no, you can't, no, and that's not safe. It is not there yet. So it's complete chaos. So what we try to teach is that you want a balance of inviting and containing. Yes, you need to have, kids need to be able to predict stuff to feel safe. So routines, which most early childhood programs have, right? First you do this, and then you do that, and then you do the other thing. But in those routines, you need to invite expressive outlets within the containing routines. So almost all early childhood and early grade programs have morning meeting, right? And a lot of the morning meetings are, today is Tuesday, December 9th, 2024. It is cloudy, which is neither here nor there. But it doesn't, I mean, kids like ritual stuff, and you can put ritual stuff into meetings. But if I say, so it's Monday and we haven't seen each other since Friday, and maybe people have a story they want to tell, then that's an invitation. And you hear all kinds of things. And some are just the kind of things kids say, and some are intense and important. And that's an example of putting an invitation into a containing routine. It can live there because that happens every day. Same thing with stories. If you can pick a book about the solar system, or you can pick a book about something that's just going on, and therefore then say, what does anyone want to say something about that? So open-ended. We read a book. Do not say how many so-and-sos were in it. Do not say what color is the something. Do not say, did anyone see a triangle? No. Say, what did you think about that story? I wonder what that story reminds you of. So that you've got an invitation within a containing routine. Story time happens every day. So that's like a nutshell about inviting and containing.
I love that for numerous reasons. One is that I think what applies to a lot of educators is that the point about if we just continue to contain, those behaviors, those words, those actions are going to come out one way or another. And I love your example of that morning meeting because, if you continue to contain, at some point a kid's going to say, well, I did this. They're going to just shout out, oh yeah, I did this. Or they're going to talk to their friend, and then we're going to say, hey, you're not supposed to be talking right now. And so let's invite those conversations, because we know that that's what's on the child's mind. Oh, you're talking about, we just came back and it's been the weekend. Oh, here's what I did at the weekend, and it was so fun. And so, highlighting that we can invite these behaviors, we can invite these words in a way that is contained and managed by us.
Right.
We talk a lot about choices and giving choices that are managed by us, that we're okay with. My choice is that I'm going to allow the kids to speak up during this time, and I'm going to contain it. So therefore, we're meeting both of our needs. I love it because I've witnessed it in some of the classrooms I've worked in. And as you can probably tell, I didn't grow up in the States. And so when I go into a classroom with little people, one of the first things they say to me is, why do you speak funny? Or one child asked me why I don't speak normally. That was fun. And, if it's in a moment where the teacher hears, sometimes I've had teachers, this is an opportunity for learning, and we pull up a map and we see where we live and where somebody else lives. And those great opportunities that children throw out to us, that we can invite further. The other piece I like of your concept about inviting is, and I think I saw it in your emotionally responsive practice book, was inviting them to bring their entire experience. And for me, I've written in my notes, to me, that's an extension of attachment theory, is that you invite and accept the child's entire experience, the good, the bad, the ugly. You know, whatever you are bringing, I am accepting of it. And I am inviting you, I'm actively encouraging you to share those pieces of you with me, and building that, or continuing to build that secure attachment relationship, that showing you that I'm a psychological home base, that I can be consistent in myself, regardless of how you are showing up. That if times are hard, I'm still here with you during that hard time. And that to me is so very powerful.
And teacher-child attachment has all kinds of amazing benefits. Like the first teachers' attachment to children predict adjustment all the way through school. Cognitive, social, and emotional. So the warm relationship, that sort of attachment. And when you have that relationship with every child, most of the time, you also create what Winnicott would call a holding environment, where the classroom becomes a space that can hold all kinds of stories, all kinds of, it doesn't have to be all happy, because if you only have happy, then sad and angry and afraid feel alienated, like they have to stay in the hall. And if there's no way for them to live in the classroom, and that's what's in a kid, it's going to be an outburst, or it's going to be depressing. It's really preventive. Classroom life is preventive mental health when it's good. We want to diminish social and emotional isolation while children are young, because if we don't do that, it creates risk for depression and antisocial behavior as they grow.
I just wrote down that because I think that that's a wonderful, wonderful quote, and perhaps our wrap up opportunity. Because as I mentioned to you before, Lesley, I think that I could sit and talk with you for hours about this. But classroom life is preventive mental health. Although I don't want to pressure any educators that are listening, but I do think that that's an extremely applicable quote to end on, and your use of the word opportunity too. That, you know, a lot of teachers and educators I speak to, they worry that they don't see the difference that they're making, or that they don't see a difference that they've made in the time that they have with a child. And I always try my hardest to remind them that they are making a difference, and it might not show in the child's actions, but you know, that old saying of they don't remember what you said, but they remember how you made them feel is very, very true. And that educators, particularly early educators, but really all educators, do have an opportunity to change a child's trajectory through life.
Absolutely.
Thank you, Lesley, so much for joining me today. I just appreciate your words and your experience, and I would love to have you back again one day in the future.
Okay. We can talk about teddy bears the next time. We didn't talk about that this time.
Okay, that sounds good. All right. Thank you, Lesley.
Bye, Kirsty.